Snow, steel, silence, then the thunder of 10,000 hooves. In the frozen winter of 1240, 100 men made 10,000 of history's most feared warriors turn and flee. Not with superior weapons, not with reinforcements, but with something the Mongol Empire had never encountered before: Vikings who refused to die. Picture this: 100 exhausted warriors standing against 10,000 fresh Mongol cavalry. These weren't just any soldiers. These were the last free warriors of Rus standing between the Mongol horde and the complete annihilation of an ancient culture. The odds? 100 to 1. The chance of survival? 0. By the end of this video, you'll understand how terrain, psychology, and sheer Nordic stubbornness created one of history's most impossible military victories. You'll discover why the Mongols' greatest strength became their fatal weakness. You'll learn the forgotten Viking battle technique that neutralized 10,000 horse archers, and you'll see how a frozen river changed the course of an empire. But here's what makes this story truly extraordinary. The Mongols erased this battle from their records. Why would the most successful military force in history want to forget a single skirmish? What made these Vikings different from every other army the Mongols had crushed from China to Poland? How did word of this battle spread fear through the entire Golden Horde? Their commander, known only in whispers as Bjorn the Unbreakable, orchestrated what military historians call the impossible. How could infantry withstand the arrows that had devastated civilizations across 2 continents? How could 100 men psychologically break thousands of veterans who had never known defeat? To understand how 100 men stopped an empire, we must first understand the terror that was sweeping across the known world. Because what happened in that nameless valley between frozen forests wasn't just a battle. It was the moment when mathematics bowed to mythology, when the unstoppable force of the Mongol Empire met something even more powerful: men who had already accepted death. If you're fascinated by the untold stories of history's most decisive battles, hit that like button and subscribe for more epic war content. Ring the notification bell to never miss these incredible tales of courage against impossible odds. Now, let me take you back to that frozen valley where empires collided. By 1240, the Mongol Empire had consumed civilizations like a plague. From the Pacific Ocean to the gates of Europe, no force had withstood their revolutionary warfare. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years fell in days. Armies that numbered in the hundreds of thousands simply ceased to exist. This wasn't conquest, this was apocalypse on horseback. Consider Kiev, the jewel of Ruses. Population before the Mongols: 50,000 souls. After 3 days of Mongol attention, fewer than 2,000 traumatized survivors. The Mongols didn't just defeat armies, they erased civilizations. Their strategy was brutally simple: surrender and live as slaves, or resist and watch everything you've ever known turn to ash and bone. The secret to Mongol dominance? Speed, range, and psychological warfare. Each warrior commanded 3 to 5 horses, allowing them to cover impossible distances without rest. Their composite bows could punch through armor at 350 yards farther than most enemies could even see clearly. But their greatest weapon was fear. They cultivated terror like a gardener tends roses. Pyramids of skulls marked their path. Refugees spread stories of unstoppable demons who drank blood and ate the hearts of brave men. But here's where it gets insane. In the northern forests of Rus, something survived that the Mongols hadn't calculated for the Varangians, the last echo of the Viking Age. These weren't the raiders of old who terrorized European coasts. These were their descendants, hardened by centuries of warfare, carrying the fighting traditions of men who believed death in battle was the highest honor. The Varangians were anachronisms warriors from a dying age facing the military revolution of the future. While the Mongols had perfected mobile warfare, the Varangians still fought in shield walls, still believed in the old gods, still carried the massive 2-handed axes that had once split Saxon shields and Frankish helms. Military logic said they should have been swept away, like autumn leaves before a hurricane. The strategic situation was desperate. The Mongol forces under Batu Khan had already crushed Volga Bulgaria, annihilated the Rus principalities one by one, and were pushing toward Novgorod. The Volga corridor, the ancient trade route that connected the Baltic to the Caspian, was their next target. Control it, and the last free lands of the north would fall like dominoes. The Mongols had assigned this task to a force of 10,000 riders under Noyan Chagatai, a commander who had earned his reputation in the furnace of the Chinese campaigns. His men were veterans who had reduced the fortress cities of Persia to rubble, who had made the proud knights of Poland and Hungary flee in terror. They moved through the winter forests like wolves, seeking the last pockets of resistance to crush before the spring campaigns. What they found instead was 100 men who had made a decision that would echo through centuries. In a nameless valley between Murom's endless forests and the frozen marshes of the Kama River, the last free warriors of the north had chosen their ground. They knew they couldn't run, there was nowhere left to go. They knew they couldn't hide, the Mongols would find them eventually. So they did the one thing the Mongols never expected. They planted their feet, raised their shields, and waited. 100 men against the empire that had conquered half the known world. But in a nameless valley between Murom's forests and the Kama marshes, something unprecedented was about to happen. Something that would prove even empires could bleed. Dawn broke grey and bitter over the Valley of Destiny. 10,000 riders under Noyan Chagatai moved through the forest paths like a bronze serpent, their approach heralded by the jingling of 10,000 bridles and the drumbeat thunder of 40,000 hooves. These were veterans of 20 conquered cities, men who had watched Baghdad burn, who had turned the knights of Legnica into corpses decorating a battlefield. Each warrior was a master of the composite bow, that miraculous weapon of horn and sinew that could drive an arrow through chainmail at distances that seemed impossible to European minds. 160 pounds of draw weight, capable of loosing 8 arrows per minute with deadly accuracy. The Mongol order of battle was perfection itself. Light cavalry scouts ranged ahead like hunting hounds. Behind them, the main force moved in disciplined units of 10, 100, and 1,000. Each man carried 2 bows and 3 quivers of 40 arrows each. Silk armor worn under leather protected them from their enemies' weapons while weighing almost nothing. Most importantly, each warrior led 3 to 5 spare horses, ensuring fresh mounts for pursuit or flight. They were the ultimate military machine of the 13th century. Against this tide of military evolution stood 100 men who might have stepped from the sagas of old. The Varangian 100 weren't regular infantry. They were the elite guard tradition passed down from the men who had once protected Byzantine emperors and carved their names on the Hagia Sophia. Each man stood over 6 feet tall, in an age when the average height was 5.5 feet. Their mail hauberks weighed 50 pounds each, hand-forged rings riveted in the old style that had protected their fathers and grandfathers before them. But what truly set them apart were their weapons. Pattern-welded axes that had been passed down through generations, their steel folded and refolded until the blades held edges that could split a silk scarf dropped upon them. Round shields of northern oak, bound with iron and painted with symbols that hadn't been seen on battlefields for a century. And in the hands of their best warriors, the terrifying Dane axes 6 feet of ashwood, topped with crescents of steel that could cleave through horse and rider alike. What happened next would haunt Mongol nightmares for generations. The Varangians had chosen their ground with the cunning of men who knew they were going to die, but intended to make death expensive. The valley they selected was a geographical trap, barely 200 yards wide, bordered on both sides by dense forest that would break up any cavalry charge. Behind them, the frozen Kama River cut off retreat, but also prevented encirclement. In front, the ground sloped gently upward, forcing any attacker to charge uphill through a narrowing funnel. Their commander, Bjorn the Unbreakable, was a legend even among these legendary warriors. 60 winters had turned his beard white as fresh snow, but his arms still swung an axe that younger men could barely lift. He had fought at the Battle of the Kalka River 17 years before, one of the few survivors who had seen Mongol tactics firsthand and lived to learn from them. Now he positioned his 100 men with the precision of a master chess player, arranging his final gambit. The psychological warfare began before the first arrow flew. The Mongols announced their presence with their traditional terror tactics, drums that thundered like the heartbeat of a giant, war cries in a dozen languages from conquered nations, the ritualistic display of horsetail standards that had presided over the destruction of empires. It was theatre designed to break enemy morale before battle was even joined. Then something happened that nobody expected. The Varangians responded with nothing. Complete, absolute silence. 100 men standing like carved runestones, their breath misting in the frozen air, the only sign they lived at all. No war cries, no drum beats, no movement except the slow, steady rise and fall of their chests. It was unnerving in its simplicity. The Mongols had conquered half the world, and every enemy had met them with noise threats, prayers, desperate battle cries. But these Northmen stood in silence that seemed to swallow sound itself. As dawn broke on February 17th, 1240. Two military philosophies were about to collide. The supreme mobility of the steppes against the immovable resolve of the north. 6 in the morning. The grey dawn light revealed the full magnitude of what the 100 faced. Mongol scouts, moving through the morning mist like ghosts, reported the impossible back to Chagatai. 100 men, no more. Standing in the open, no cavalry, no reinforcements. They simply wait. Chagatai himself rode forward to observe this curiosity. What he saw defied every principle of warfare he knew. The Varangians had formed a single line across the narrowest part of the valley, 50 yards of overlapping shields, creating a wooden wall decorated with fading paint and old battle scars. Behind the shields, axe blades caught the weak morning sun like a fence of steel teeth. The positioning was either brilliant or suicidal. In that confined space, the Mongol advantage in mobility died. Their ability to encircle and destroy was choked off by geography and geometry, but Chagatai had crushed shield walls before. The solution was simple arrow storm. He gave the command, and 5,000 composite bows bent as one. The sky darkened with the first volley, 5,000 shafts arcing through the morning air, each one capable of punching through armor, each one seeking northern flesh. This is where mythology might actually be underselling reality. The arrows fell like winter sleet, a rattling, hissing death that had broken the courage of armies from China to Poland. But the Varangian shields came up in practiced unison, overlapping like dragon scales, creating a wooden roof that swallowed the arrow storm. Shafts that found gaps between shields met mail armor that turned their points. A few men grunted as arrows found flesh in arms or legs, but the line held. Not a man fell. The second volley came within heartbeats of the first, then the third. For 10 minutes, arrows fell like deadly rain. The Varangian shields bristled with shafts like a porcupine's back. Still, the silent line held. Still, not a man broke formation. The psychological impact on the Mongols was immediate. Every other enemy had wavered under the arrow storm. Men always broke when death fell from the sky. But these Northmen simply endured, patient as stone. Here's where it gets worse. Chagatai ordered the feigned retreat, a classic Mongol tactic. 1,000 riders charged forward, loosing arrows at full gallop, then wheeled and fled, hoping to draw the Varangians into pursuit where they could be cut down in the open. "Come out and die with honor," they shouted in broken Rus. "Don't die cowering behind wood." The Varangians didn't move. Not one step. The discipline was inhuman. By 8 in the morning, frustration crept through the Mongol ranks like poison. These Northmen violated every rule. They wouldn't pursue, they wouldn't break, they wouldn't even speak. Mongol warriors began to mutter. Some spoke of northern magic, of men who had made pacts with frost demons. Others remembered half-heard stories of the Rus warriors who served the Byzantine emperor, men who chose death over dishonor and fought with the fury of cornered bears. The frozen river at the Varangians' backs began to play its role. The morning sun turned the ice slick with a thin layer of melt. Mongol horses, bred for the steppes, struggled for footing on the valley floor, where snowmelt had refrozen into sheets of ice. Several scouts' horses slipped and fell, their riders cursing as they struggled to rise. The Varangians had counted on this. Every detail of the ground had been chosen with intent, but the real shock was yet to come. At 9 o'clock, Chagatai decided on direct assault. No more games, no more tactics. Simple, brutal mathematics. 10,000 against 100. He selected 500 of his finest heavy cavalry, veterans who had shattered the ironclad knights of Europe. They formed up in disciplined ranks, lances lowered, their horses stamping and blowing steam in the cold air. The drumbeats began again, building to thunder. This would end it. The charge began at a trot, building speed as they descended the slight slope toward the Varangian line. But physics itself seemed to favor the defenders. The ice betrayed the horses. The gentle slope that aided their charge also compressed them, forcing riders closer together as the valley narrowed. By the time they reached full gallop, they were packed so tight that fallen horses would take down their neighbors. 200 yards. The Varangians stood motionless. 100 yards. Still no movement from the shield wall. 50 yards. The Mongol cavalry lowered lances, preparing for impact. 25 yards. And then, Odin. The roar erupted from 100 throats simultaneously, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. The psychological impact was devastating. Horses, already struggling on ice, shied at the sudden noise. The neat cavalry line wavered, bunched, lost cohesion. At noon, Chagatai made the decision that would haunt Mongol dreams. No more testing, no more probing. He would throw waves of his best warriors at this wooden wall until it shattered through sheer weight of numbers. Because in all of Mongol history, mass had always triumphed over will. He was about to learn why the Northmen had chosen to die here, in this nameless valley where empires would learn the taste of fear. The first true charge hit like thunder in a barrel. 500 of the Khan's finest, the lance head of an empire that had never known defeat, slammed into the Varangian shield wall with the combined weight of horses, men, and destiny. The sound was apocalyptic wood cracking, metal screaming against metal, horses shrieking, men roaring their death songs in a dozen languages. But here's where it gets insane. The shields held, impossibly, against all logic and physics. They held. The front rank of Varangians had braced their shields against the frozen earth, each man's shoulder pressed against his neighbour's, creating an interlocked wall of wood and will. As lances struck shields, the impact rippled through the line like a wave, each man absorbing and dispersing the force. Lances designed to punch through infantry shattered against northern oak. Horses, unable to stop on the ice, crashed into the wall and reared, exposing their riders to what came next. 100 axes rose and fell in perfect unison. The Varangian counterstrike was mechanical in its precision, beautiful in its brutality. Dane axes, swung by men who had trained since boyhood, carved through Mongol armor like it was parchment. The 6-foot axes, designed to cleave through shield and mail, found horseflesh and human bone with equal ease. The sound was wet, meaty, final. The snow turned from white to pink to deep crimson in heartbeats. Mongol elite cavalry, the pride of the horde, fell like wheat before the scythe. Horses screamed and thrashed, their hot blood steaming in the frozen air. Men who had conquered from sunrise to sunset died without understanding how farmers with axes had stopped their charge. But wait, it gets worse. The Mongol horses, dying and wounded, didn't simply fall. In the narrow valley, with ice beneath and pressure behind, they created a wall of thrashing, dying flesh. The second rank of cavalry, unable to stop their charge, crashed into their own fallen comrades. The brutal arithmetic of the valley began its work width that prevented flanking, ice that stole footing, and now a growing rampart of horse corpses that blocked advance. Young Eriksson, barely 16 winters old, found himself face to face with a dismounted Mongol warrior. The Mongol, a veteran of the Chinese campaigns, had lost his mount but not his will. He came at the boy with the curved saber that had drunk the blood of knights and peasants alike. But Eriksson had been raised on stories of Ragnarok, trained from the moment he could hold a weapon. The heavy northern axe met the quick eastern blade. Experience met youth. Speed met strength. For 3 heartbeats they danced. Then Eriksson's axe found the gap between helmet and shoulder. The Mongol fell, his life's blood joining the crimson slush, and Eriksson wept even as he raised his shield against the next attacker. Chagatai watched his elite die and felt the first cold finger of doubt. But he was Mongol. Retreat was not a word in their language. He ordered the second wave, 1,000 riders, lighter cavalry meant to exploit the gaps the heavy horse had created. But there were no gaps. The Varangian line had not broken. It had barely even bent. The 1,000 came on, firing their bows as they rode. At this range, the arrows came flat and hard, seeking gaps in mail, the eye-slits of helmets, the spaces between shields. 3 Varangians fell, arrows sprouting from their faces. The line closed, shields shifting to fill the gaps, axes ready. The mounted archers expected the shield wall to charge, to break formation in rage at their fallen comrades. Instead, the Varangians took a single step forward. Just one, synchronized, deliberate. The psychological impact was devastating. They weren't defending, they were advancing. This is the moment that separates legend from history. The second wave hit the growing wall of dead horses and had to slow, had to pick their way through. As they did, they entered the killing ground. The space where Varangian axes could reach, but Mongol sabers could not. It became a nightmare of geometry and death. Dane axes, swung by men who had accepted their own deaths hours ago, carved through the lighter Mongol armor with terrible efficiency. The funnel of death claimed rider after rider. Then came the sound that changed everything. A berserker's roar. One Varangian, overcome by battle madness, broke from the line. He cast aside his shield, gripped his axe with both hands, and charged into the Mongol ranks. This was the fury of the old gods made flesh, the rage of the north given form. He killed 3 in his first rush, his axe describing red arcs in the morning air. 5 more fell before Mongol arrows found him. 7, 9. 12 Mongols died before the berserker finally fell. His body so full of arrows he looked like a man-shaped hedge. But his death had brought something precious fear. The Mongols had seen warriors die. They had never seen a man ignore death. What happened next defied every rule of medieval warfare. Bjorn the Unbreakable himself stepped forward from the line. 3 arrows struck him. Shoulder, thigh, side. He pulled each one out without breaking eye contact with Chagatai, threw them aside, and raised his ancient axe in challenge. The message was clear. Pain meant nothing. Wounds meant nothing. Only the line mattered. The universe wasn't done with its cruel jokes. As the second wave reeled back, leaving hundreds more dead, nature itself joined the battle. The morning sun had been warming the valley floor, and the ice that had been the Mongols' enemy now became something worse: slush. Blood, snowmelt, and churned earth combined into a crimson bog that sucked at horses' hooves and made footing treacherous. The Mongol advantage in mobility didn't just decrease. It died in that frozen muck. Here's the part historians still can't explain. Chagatai, driven by shame and rage, ordered the fire arrows. Bundles of oil-soaked rags were tied to shafts, lit, and sent arcing toward the shield wall. This had broken the spirit of cities from Samarkand to Kiev. Fire was the universal fear, the destroyer of walls and warrior alike. The Varangians had faced Greek fire in Byzantine service, had seen men burn alive in their armor. They knew what was coming. But the price of victory was about to be paid. The fire arrows struck shields, mail, flesh. 2 Varangians became human torches, their death screams piercing the battle din. But their brothers didn't break. They didn't even flinch. The burning men were pulled back. Their suffering ended with merciful axe blows, and fresh warriors stepped forward to take their places. The shield wall endured, now decorated with flame and shadow. By the 7th hour of battle, the pile of horse corpses had grown to a grotesque monument 6 feet high. The Mongols had to climb their own dead to reach the Varangians. Each assault became more difficult, more costly. The crimson slush had become a swamp that devoured the wounded. Steam rose from the valley floor like the breath of dragons, a mixture of hot blood and frozen earth. Then physics itself seemed to favor the defenders. The Mongol commanders noticed something terrifying. Their arrows were running low. Each warrior had started with 120 shafts. Thousands upon thousands had been fired, and most lay useless, embedded in shields or lost in the muck. For the first time in memory, the Mongol arrow storm faltered. Whispers began among the horde. These weren't men. They were demons. They were Odin's chosen, the Einherjar, who could not die until their appointed time. How else could 100 men stand against thousands? How else could they shrug off wounds that would fell normal warriors? The cursed valley had become a gate to the northern hell, and they were fighting the guardians of the dead. What the Mongols saw next broke their spirits. The Varangians, sensing the moment, took another step forward, then another. The shield wall, bristling with arrows, decorated with blood, began to advance. 100 had become perhaps 70 still standing, but they came on like an avalanche, slow, inexorable, crushing everything in their path. Their war song rose, an ancient chant that predated Christ, that spoke of glory and death and the halls of the slain. Chagatai himself took up his lance. If his men would not break this wall, he would do it himself, or die in shame. 2,000 riders formed up behind him for one final charge. The cream of the Mongol force, the warriors who had made empires kneel, prepared to gamble everything on one last throw of the dice. Because in that moment, it had become about more than victory. It had become about the very idea of Mongol invincibility. What happened in Hour 7 still gives me chills. The final charge came not as a wave, but as a hammer blow. Every remaining mounted warrior compressed into a fist of steel and fury, aimed at the center of the Varangian line. Chagatai led from the front, his personal banner snapping in the wind, his lance aimed at Bjorn's heart. This would end it, one way or another. The impact shattered the morning. The Varangian center bent, buckled, almost broke. For the first time, Mongols broke through, their horses leaping the wall of corpses, their sabers finding northern flesh. The melee became general, all order lost in the press of bodies and clash of steel. This was no longer strategy. This was murder at arm's length, where skill mattered less than will and luck. And in that frozen moment, empires balanced on a knife's edge, because if the Varangians broke here, nothing would stop the Mongol tide from drowning the last free lands of the north. But if they held, if somehow these bloodied, exhausted, dying men held, then the world would learn that the Golden Horde could bleed. As the sun began to set, painting the valley in blood-red light, the impossible became inevitable. The Mongol charge, which had shattered armies and toppled kingdoms, shattered itself against northern iron and northern will. Chaghatay's lance found only empty air as Bjorn, despite his wounds, stepped aside and brought his grandfather's axe down in an arc that would echo through legend. The Mongol commander's horse screamed and fell. Chagatai rolled free, came to his feet with saber in hand, and faced the white-bearded giant who had orchestrated this impossible defense. For 10 heartbeats that lasted 10 years, the two commanders circled each other in the press of battle. East met north, future met past, mobility met immovability. Then they came together in a clash that Viking skalds and Mongol shamans would both whisper of in years to come. Chagatai was faster, younger, unwounded, but Bjorn had something more. He had already accepted his death and fought only to make it meaningful. When Chagatai's saber found his side, Bjorn trapped the blade with his body and brought his axe down one final time. Chagatai fell, his skull split like kindling, and with him fell the Mongol will to fight. For the first time in a generation, the Golden Horde ran. It began with the warriors nearest to Chagatai. Seeing their commander fall, watching the white-bearded demon still standing despite wounds that would have killed 3 men, they took involuntary steps backward. The backwards movement spread like ripples in a pond. Within moments, what had been a disciplined, if desperate, assault became a rout. 10,000 of the finest warriors in human history turned their backs on a battlefield, not from strategy, from fear. The Varangians, exhausted beyond human endurance, did not pursue. They couldn't. Of the 100 who had stood in the morning line, 31 lay dead among the corpses of their enemies. 68 still breathed, but barely half could stand without support. The snow around them was no longer white. It had become a crimson marsh, decorated with the detritus of empire. Bodies of men and horses created a new geography, a monument to impossible courage. Here's what your history teacher never told you. In 8 hours of continuous combat, 100 men had faced approximately 40 separate charges. They had withstood over 50,000 arrows, enough to darken the sky, enough to outfit an army. Conservative estimates placed Mongol casualties at over 800 dead, with hundreds more wounded. The cream of Chagatai's force lay twisted in the frozen muck, their worldview shattered along with their bodies. Bjorn the Unbreakable lived up to his name for another hour, long enough to see the Mongol banners disappear into the forest, long enough to speak the words that would echo through northern legend. Tell them, we held. Then the accumulated wounds, 7 arrows, 3 deep saber cuts, and countless smaller injuries finally claimed their due. He died standing, his hand still gripping the axe that had drunk so deeply of Mongol blood, his eyes fixed on the forest where his enemies had fled. The immediate tactical consequences were staggering. The Mongol force, demoralized and leaderless, abandoned their planned strike at Novgorod. What should have been a swift winter campaign became a shameful retreat. The detour around the Valley of Death added 3 weeks to their movement, 3 weeks that allowed the northern cities to prepare defenses, to gather courage from the impossible tale that spread like wildfire. But the Varangians paid victory's price in full. As darkness fell, the survivors faced the grim arithmetic of triumph. Young Eriksson, who had become a man in the crucible of battle, wept openly as he recognized friends among the dead. The wounded were tended with rough battlefield medicine arrows pushed through rather than pulled out, wounds packed with snow to numb the pain, mail cut away from swollen flesh. Those too badly hurt to survive the night were given the mercy stroke by their brothers, their eyes turned northward toward a home they would never see. The burning of the dead took 3 days. The Varangians would not leave their brothers for wolves and ravens. Despite exhaustion that went bone deep, despite wounds that wept blood and pus, they built pyres in the old way. Each dead warrior was laid out with his weapons, his mail cleaned of blood, his face composed in death's peace. The flames rose high enough to be seen for miles, a signal to any Mongol scouts that might linger. This ground was bought with northern blood and would be honored with northern rites. Some victories echo through centuries. This one thundered. Within days, every Rus survivor from Kiev to Novgorod knew the tale. 100 had stood against 10,000. The invincible Mongol horse had been stopped by farmers with axes. The impossible had been made real through courage and frozen ground. In taverns and halls, around fires and in huddled groups of refugees, the story grew. Some said Odin himself had stood with the Varangians. Others claimed the ghosts of ancient heroes had risen from their burial mounds to fight once more. But wait, it gets worse for the Mongols. Chaghatay's shameful defeat could not be hidden from Batu Khan. The loss of a full Tumen's worth of warriors to a mere 100 enemies was unprecedented, unthinkable. The psychological damage spread through the Mongol ranks like plague. If 100 desperate men could inflict such losses, what might 1,000 do? 10,000? For the first time since they had ridden from the steppes, doubt crept into Mongol hearts. The strategic impact was immediate. Mongol commanders, who had previously treated forest regions as minor obstacles, now saw them as potential death traps. Every narrow valley might hide another band of desperate men willing to trade their lives at terrible exchange rates. The mathematics of conquest, which had always favored the Mongols' mobility and numbers, suddenly included a new variable terrain where their advantages became liabilities. You think you know courage? Let me tell you about courage. It's standing in a shield wall when every instinct screams to run. It's pulling arrows from your own flesh to keep fighting. It's watching friends die and stepping forward to take their place. It's choosing where to make your stand, and making that stand mean something. The Varangian 100 had proven something that would ripple through history. Sometimes, the immovable object doesn't need to defeat the unstoppable force. It just needs to make moving too expensive to bear. As the smoke from the funeral pyres dissipated into the winter sky, it carried more than the souls of dead warriors. It carried a message that would haunt the dreams of every Mongol commander who heard it. In that valley, mathematics collided with mythology, and mythology won. The Golden Horde discovered that some gold doesn't melt, no matter how hot the flame. What followed defied every principle the Mongols had used to build their empire. Within months, the tactical lessons of the Nameless Valley spread through the surviving Rus populations like seeds on the wind. Deny them space, deny them victory, make every forest path a potential killing ground, transform geography from backdrop to weapon. The Mongol hesitation in forest regions became pronounced, their advances cautious where once they had been boldly confident. The invincible horde had learned a new word, vulnerable. History pivoted on this single frozen valley. The Mongol expansion, which had seemed inevitable as the tide, suddenly found limits, not in great armies or mighty fortresses, but in the willingness of desperate men to stand in narrow places and sell their lives at premium rates. The northern forests, which should have been swept clean in a single winter campaign, remained contested for years. Novgorod never fell. The fur trade that had enriched the Rus for centuries continued, funding resistance that might otherwise have withered. Here's where even the Mongol chronicles fall silent. In their meticulous records of conquest and glory, no mention exists of the valley where 100 farmers broke the myth of Mongol invincibility. Defeat was beneath documentation. To acknowledge such a loss would be to admit that the mandate of heaven had limits, that there existed men whom the eternal blue sky did not favor. Better to let silence swallow the shame. But legends have their own life. The tale of Bjorn's stand spread beyond the Rus lands. In Sweden, Norway, Denmark, wherever the old blood still ran, strong warriors heard of their distant cousins who had made the world's conquerors bleed. The Varangian Guard in Constantinople, that elite unit that traced its lineage to Harald Hardrada himself, added new verses to their battle songs. Even among the Mongols, whispered stories circulated of the cursed valley where northern demons had feasted on the best of the horde. Modern military parallels abound. Thermopylae, Rorke's Drift, the Chosin Reservoir. Again and again, history proves that terrain plus determination can multiply fighting power beyond mathematical logic. Today's special forces study these battles, understanding that a small force in the right position with the right mindset can achieve strategic effects far beyond their numbers. The Varangian 100 had written the textbook in blood and snow. This is why terrain matters more than numbers, why psychological dominance can evaporate in moments, why empires fear memory more than armies. Every empire builds its power on the myth of inevitability. But myths are fragile things, and sometimes all it takes is 100 men who refuse to read the script to shatter them entirely. When the spring thaw came, it revealed more than bodies. It revealed an empire's nightmare proof that the unstoppable could be stopped, that the unbeatable could be beaten. Archaeological evidence found centuries later confirmed the saga's truth. Mass graves filled with Mongol and Varangian dead, arrowheads by the thousands, preserved in the acidic soil, and at the center, a great fire pit where heroes had been given to the flames. The shield wall didn't just hold, it became legend. The age of Viking glory had ended not with a whimper, but with 100 axes drinking deeply of empire's blood. In that valley, time moved backward to an age when individual courage could defy the arithmetic of power, when the last free breath of the North made an empire choke on its own ambitions. They came as conquerors. They left as storytellers of defeat,